Australians can't afford another year of government inaction on the economy. Queenslanders can't afford another year of being taken for granted by the LNP. They need a voice in the conduct of the affairs of this nation, and Anthony and I want to give Queenslanders that voice, and that's why we're starting the year here. Our families can't afford another year of record debt. Workers can't afford another year of stagnant wages. Employers can't afford another year of weak spending, weak confidence and weak business conditions. Now, the Prime Minister has been saying that Australia is an amazing place, and of course we agree with him. But Australia will fall short of its potential under a government which is too complacent to come up with a plan for fires or climate change or the economy, and which is too divisive to bring people together, to rise up and meet some of these big national challenges that will face us not just in 2020 but in the decade to come as well. Queensland is a really central focus of Labor under Anthony's leadership. We will continue to listen to Queenslanders, to advocate on their behalf, to give them a voice in the conduct of this nation's affairs, because for too long the LNP has taken them for granted. That's why we begin the year here in Queensland. That's why Anthony will be back again and again and again, giving the people of Queensland the best possible representation and leadership which has been so sorely lacking in recent years.
Look, thanks very much, Jim. And I did want to consciously begin 2020 here in Queensland in order to reinforce the message that Labor wants to engage with Queenslanders about job creation, about wealth creation as well as its distribution. And that's why it's significant that we have a Queenslander in Jim Chalmers leading our economic team. I do want to say that here at the Redcliffe line, the last station, Kippering, first promised in 1895, it took a federal Labor government working with Queensland Labor to deliver this important piece of infrastructure. And in the time that I was the infrastructure minister, whether it be Gold Coast Light Rail, whether it be the Ipswich Motorway, the Gateway Motorway North, whether it be the Bruce Highway from Karoi to Curra, the changes around Rockhampton, Townsville, Mackay, Cairns, we invested in Queensland. We never took Queensland for granted, and we weren't complacent about the economy. The fact is that this electorate here in Petrie is going to be absolutely critical if we're going to form government after the next election. So I will be a regular visitor to Queensland. I do want to make some comments about the bushfires, and firstly I want to express my condolences to the family and friends and community who lost Robert and Patrick Solway at Cobargo yesterday. Today there's news of another fatality, a man found in a burnt-out car near Lake Conjola on the south coast of New South Wales. That's 4 deaths in just recent days, but 14 over this horrendous bushfire season. It is time for the Prime Minister to convene COAG. I wrote to him in November, and we saw with the issue of him coming to an arrangement with Gladys Berejiklian and the New South Wales Premier, and then belatedly contacting the other states, that what we actually need is national leadership and a national approach. Of course, the Prime Minister had said that it was a distraction, the issue of volunteer firefighters being given economic compensation. He then said it was a state issue, and he then said, most remarkably, that they want to be there. They don't want to be there. No one wants these horrendous scenes that are being played out that look like something that is quite unbelievable. The Prime Minister also says in a piece today in the tabloid newspapers, he speaks about not panicking. He speaks about the quiet Australians. Well, the Australians I've met here in Queensland and indeed throughout the country aren't very quiet at the moment. They actually want leadership. They want leadership on the economy, they want leadership on these bushfires, and they want an end to complacency. This is not business as usual. this fire season. Climate change is certainly having an impact as well, and they expect more than newspaper articles, whether it be from Scott Morrison or today a quite remarkable misleading piece by Angus Taylor that Australia is somehow pulling our weight. They expect actually a bit of fair dinkum truth about what's going on, because they can see it, they can smell it, and we're seeing the impact of complacency. Australia can't do it all on our own. That's absolutely right. But the truth is that Angus Taylor went to the Madrid conference and argued, along with a few other countries, for less action, not more. Argued for an accounting trick rather than actually reducing emissions. Happy to take questions.
Is there a part of you that wishes you were in Victoria or New South Wales today?
I'll be in New South Wales later today. I'll be in Victoria tomorrow. I have been on the south coast of New South Wales. I've been in the Blue Mountains. I've been in the Hawkesbury. I've been in the North Coast. I have been right around the country, and at this stage we're talking with the Victorian government about being there. I'll be in South Australia this weekend, and so I have been wherever possible around the country, talking firsthand, thanking our volunteer firefighters, thanking those people in the permanent services and emergency services, thanking those defence personnel who are helping out.
The Greens are calling for a royal commission into bushfires. Will you support that?
Well, I think the immediate action that's required, not something that will report in 6 months, which is a minimum time for a royal commission. Normally they take years rather than months. What we need right now is for COAG to be convened. I wrote to the Prime Minister in November calling for that. I called for that and it hasn't happened. We've seen that there has been, therefore, a lack of coordination, a lack of a national approach, for example, to the compensation for volunteer firefighters. I called for, that was one of the elements I said should be discussed there, that we should discuss the resourcing, and we've seen changes in terms of the amount of defence assets which are being applied here. It is appropriate that we actually convene all the levels of government for what is a national crisis. We see that these bushfires don't respect state boundaries, and nor should we when it comes to the response to this issue. Well, a Royal Commission takes months to establish. It can't be established very quickly. I'm sure that the Premiers and Chief Ministers would be available immediately to ensure that coordination. What we need is a response right now. Certainly we need to look at the analysis, how we manage our national parks, the issue of the impact of climate change. The truth is that this is not business as usual. In my view, we're going to need to consider the whole way that we compensate firefighters on a more permanent basis, how we deal with those issues. There will be gaps, no doubt, in terms of some of the volunteer firefighters who, with the compensation that Scott Morrison's applying through the states, there'll be people who are going to miss out. And there's a need, I think, to make sure that no one is placed in a circumstance whereby they're put into poverty or into a circumstance whereby it's cost them dollars on top of the sacrifice they're making. Our firefighters are exhibiting just incredible courage. I know people have seen the footage of a fire truck going through an extraordinary fire. You know, I just am in absolute awe and am inspired by the courage of these Australians. Well, obviously he's treating it seriously. All Australians are treating it seriously. But what we're not getting is the sort of coordination that we need. And I think the Prime Minister has continued over a range of issues. It's sort of one of his go-to media talking points to speak about we don't want to panic, we don't want to have any alarm. Young people shouldn't be scared by climate change. I tell you what, young people watching the footage on the news at the moment would be pretty, it's scary. It's scary. It's scary for everyone. And that means that we need a considered response. But I think that the Prime Minister, in terms of some of his tone, could more accurately reflect the views that I'm getting back from the community wherever I go.
On that, the Prime Minister's
I'm an optimist, but guess what? Things don't happen by themselves. Economies don't create growth. Wages don't grow if a government just sits back and has a hands-off approach. And this crisis needs a response. It needs a serious response from all of government and indeed all of the private sector and all of society. This is a national emergency that is going on here, and it needs a considered response. And I'm optimistic that we can come through this, but it won't happen by everyone just being quiet and not talking about what's needed.
What role do you think German coal mining is playing?
Well, climate change is affected by fossil fuel burning. We know that anthropogenic climate change is caused by human activity since the Industrial Revolution. And in recent times it's having an impact, just as we know that CFCs were having an impact on the ozone layer, and the world came together. The world came together to find solutions. And I'm confident that we can find solutions, but we need to avoid dangerous climate change. What we're seeing at the moment is dangerous. We're seeing the predictions of the scientists, unfortunately, played out. The scientists told us that the fire seasons would be longer and more intense, that there'd be more intense cyclones, there'd be more intense extreme weather events. Tragically, we are seeing that occur, and that's why it needs a response that doesn't play games with the accountancy fiddles at international conferences, that lowers our emissions, and that is relative to global emissions. Of course, it's accurate. That action by Australia alone won't change everything. But if everyone has that attitude, if every nation state says, well, it's not me, I won't make a difference. It's a bit like, any form of pollution. If everyone just thinks they can throw their rubbish out the car and it doesn't make a difference to the rubbish that is around our cities and regions and towns, then where will we end up? We'll end up with a hell of a mess. What we're seeing here is that there's a need for Australia to take domestic action. At the moment, they don't have an energy policy. They don't have a climate change plan. And what we also need them to do then is to take that credibility that would come from a national program and take that into international forums and argue for stronger international action. Because we know that the predictions were also that the nature of the Australian continent, with the impact that we're seeing the dryness have as a result of the drought, would mean that we'll be particularly impacted by climate change, which is why we need global action. At the moment, we don't have domestic action that's appropriate, and we have Australia actually playing a negative role in those international forums. Sorry?
You said that there's no business.
The second bit I didn't hear with the bus.
Do you think there's no environmental case for opening coal plants? The environmental case?
Well, the key with action on climate change has been to ensure that the economic drivers are there. What we're seeing in Australia, for example, at the moment, is that in spite of the government's rhetoric about a new coal-fired power station that somehow would be state-owned, sort of Soviet style, because the market is speaking. The market has spoken when it comes to new coal mines new coal-fired power stations in Australia. With regard to mining, what we see is that at the moment, if you just shut down Australia's coal exports tomorrow, that wouldn't have a positive impact in terms of lowering emissions, because the emissions would rise because it would come from somewhere else. What we need is global action in terms of changing to a clean energy future globally. That is happening, but the Madrid conference was very disappointing, and Australia needs to play a positive role there. Well, it's not a mine that is from government. It's something that is a private sector operation, and what the role of government is to do is to put in place the environmental frameworks that are appropriate, make sure those checks and balances are there, and then it's up to the private sector to make those decisions. Very clearly, that project had difficulty attracting private capital financing for the proposal. Thanks.